Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we are going to be taking a look at Martin Luther King Jr.,
Okay.
but we're going kind of beyond the I Have a Dream speech and all the things that you usually hear about him.
Right.
We're going to be going a little bit deeper.
Sounds good.
And the source that we're going to be using to do that is called 50 Interesting Facts About Martin Luther King Jr. from the Fact Site.
Yeah.
So like I said, going a little bit deeper into MLK, I think we're going to find some interesting stuff here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's easy to sort of simplify these big figures, especially when you learn about them in school, right?
Mhm.
You just learn the highlights,
Yeah.
the most famous moments,
Right, exactly.
and forget that there's a whole complex individual behind it.
Right, and the kind of their full life story and everything that went into making them who they were. So for instance,
Right.
most people don't realize that MLK wasn't actually his given name. He was born Michael King Jr.,
Oh, okay.
and they actually changed his name when he was 5 years old.
Wow, interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, so his father was inspired by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther.
Okay.
And so, he decided to change his name and his son's name as well. And it's kind of interesting to think about,
Yeah.
how being named after someone who challenged the status quo so much
Uh-huh.
might have actually influenced him down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes you wonder, right? Like just thinking about that name every day and sort of what it stands for.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of influences, both his father and grandfather were ministers, so
Oh, wow.
pretty strong
Yeah.
foundation there for where he ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. To grow up sort of immersed in that world and that tradition
Right,
had
yeah.
a profound impact on his development as a leader and a thinker.
Yeah, for sure. And then, get this, he actually struggled with spelling and grammar.
Real?
Which is so funny to think about when you hear his
Yeah.
amazing speeches and all the writings that he did.
Wow, that is surprising.
It's like, man, that just shows that he really worked hard and was committed to mastering communication,
Right.
which obviously was such a huge part of his success, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
He was such a powerful speaker that it's hard to imagine that he struggled with those basic elements of language.
Right. Exactly.
But I guess it just goes to show that anyone can overcome their challenges with hard work and determination.
Totally. Well, and what really struck me was the story about his first speech when he was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
He won this contest, and the topic that he chose to speak on was racial injustice.
Really? At 15? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So it's like he was kind of meant to
Yeah.
go down this path.
Yeah, you can almost see the trajectory of his life starting to take shape at that point.
Totally.
That's wild.
And then that same year, he went and he worked in Connecticut for a summer job. And that was actually the first time that he had experienced racial equality.
Interesting.
So, living in the South his whole life and then seeing that and then going back to the South, I can only imagine that that had a huge impact on his worldview.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To see that a different reality is possible, a more just reality,
Right.
must have been incredibly powerful and maybe even frustrating to come back to the South where things were so different.
Totally. Like, how can things be like this here when they're like that
Right.
somewhere else? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I bet that really fueled his desire for change.
Yeah, for sure. But let's back up for a second because,
Yeah.
we think of him as this, leader for social justice and all this stuff. But he actually was a pretty well-rounded guy and had
Yeah.
other interests, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important to remember that he was a person, right, with a full life beyond just his activism. So it's interesting to sort of explore those other facets of his personality.
Yeah, totally. Well, he apparently was quite fashionable and he loved jazz music.
Really? Huh, cool.
Yeah,
I can just imagine him like listening to some smooth jazz.
getting ready for a big event or something.
It humanizes him a bit, right?
Yeah.
Takes him off that pedestal and shows that he was just a regular person who enjoyed the finer things in life, too.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
He also played the piano and the violin and was a great singer, so.
Oh, wow. He was a real Renaissance man.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, right?
Very impressive.
And it's interesting, too, to think about how that creative side
Yeah.
probably played a role in his powerful speeches and his ability to connect with people so emotionally.
Absolutely. Music and art have this incredible ability to move people, to speak to their hearts and souls.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see how that background would have influenced his communication style.
Totally.
It's all connected.
Yeah. And then there's this little tidbit about him almost marrying a white woman in college,
Oh, wow. Really?
which is pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah, that would have been a very different path for him.
Totally different.
I mean, imagine the societal pressures and personal sacrifices he would have faced.
Right. Especially at that time.
Exactly, especially back then.
Wow.
Interracial relationships were incredibly taboo, so it's remarkable to think about the kind of courage it would have taken to go against those norms.
Totally. It
Yeah.
just, it makes you think about all the choices that he made
Yeah,
and how those choices led him to where he ended up.
absolutely. It's a reminder that our lives are shaped by a series of choices, and even small decisions can have ripple effects that we might not even realize.
Right. Well, and speaking of choices,
Yeah.
he was incredibly driven academically.
Oh.
Like, he skipped grades
Wow.
and went to college early and
Yeah.
was class president and valedictorian
Dang.
and then pursued a PhD.
Wow, talk about overachiever.
I know, right?
That's incredible. It sounds like he was just constantly striving for more, always pushing himself to learn and grow.
Yeah, he was a very ambitious guy for sure. And actually, during this time, he became really influenced by Thoreau and Gandhi
Oh, interesting.
and their philosophies of nonviolent resistance. And so it's like you can see how his education was kind of shaping his worldview.
Right, so it wasn't just about achieving academic success for him.
Right.
It was about using his knowledge and intellect to understand the world
Yeah.
and find ways to make it better.
Yeah, for sure. But it wasn't all perfect, right? The article mentions that there were some allegations of plagiarism surrounding his dissertation,
Oh, wow.
which is a kind
Yeah.
of crazy to think about. It's like, even people we admire
Right.
could have...
Complex legacies.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good reminder that nobody's perfect, right?
Right.
And that even those who achieve great things can make mistakes. I think it's important to acknowledge those complexities rather than trying to sweep them under the rug.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's also interesting to note that his wife, Coretta Scott King, was actually initially reluctant to marry a preacher.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, she was an incredible woman in her own right, and their partnership was
Uh-huh.
really strong and went way beyond, just a traditional marriage.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like they were true partners in life and in their activism.
Right, exactly. They were both very committed to social justice and worked side by side throughout the movement.
Right.
And then at just 25 years old, he was thrust into this leadership position during the Montgomery bus boycott.
Wow, 25.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
that's
young to be leading such a pivotal movement.
right. That's such a huge
Yeah,
turning
Yeah.
point, right?
absolutely. I mean, the Montgomery bus boycott was a major turning point in the civil rights movement. And for him to be at the forefront of that at such a young age is remarkable. It must have taken incredible courage.
Right. And knowing the risks
Yeah,
involved in challenging segregation,
for sure. I mean, they were putting their lives on the line to fight for equality.
Totally. And he really did. He and his family faced so much danger.
Right.
I mean, they actually firebombed his house while he was
Right.
with his wife and daughter inside.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I can't even imagine the fear and trauma they must have experienced.
Right. Yeah. Just the constant threat of violence is just
Yeah,
crazy to think about.
absolutely. It underscores the incredible bravery it took to be a leader during that era.
Right.
They knew the risks, and yet they kept fighting.
Yeah, they didn't back down.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the firebombing and things like that.
Right.
He was also the target of this terrifying assassination attempt where a woman stabbed him with a letter
A
opener.
letter opener. Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. That's chilling.
The blade actually narrowly missed his aorta.
Oh my gosh.
So it's incredible that he survived and continued to work after that.
Yeah, it speaks to his unwavering commitment to the cause.
Great.
He knew the risks were real and present, and yet he refused to be silent.
Right. He didn't let the fear control him. And then, we can't forget about the just systemic oppression that he faced as well.
Right.
The article talked about how he was arrested 29 times.
29 times. That's insane.
Yeah.
What were they arresting him for?
Well, they listed some of the charges.
What's-
Driving 5 miles over the speed limit. Having an Alabama driver's license while driving in Georgia.
Seriously. Those are trumped up charges for sure.
I know, it's ridiculous.
They were clearly just looking for any excuse to harass him and try to stop his work.
Yeah, totally.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained racism and prejudice were in the system at that time.
Right, exactly.
They were using the legal system as a weapon against him.
Yeah, for sure.
It's appalling.
It's crazy. And even when he was unjustly imprisoned, there was that time where he was sentenced to hard labor after a sit-in just because he was on probation from one of those previous arrests.
Oh, wow. They really weren't letting up.
No, they were relentless.
It's amazing that he managed to stay strong and keep fighting in the face of such constant oppression.
Yeah, it's truly inspiring.
It is. But, it's also a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted. We have to be vigilant in protecting the rights of all people because it's so easy for those rights to be eroded.
Absolutely.
Especially when certain groups are targeted and marginalized.
Right. Fortunately, in that particular case, Robert F. Kennedy actually intervened and helped to secure his release.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting.
So, it shows that the movement was gaining national attention and that people were starting to realize that the situation was unjust.
Yeah, it shows that their efforts were making a difference, that they were starting to sway public opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
And that even powerful figures were beginning to take notice.
Right. Yeah.
That's encouraging.
And then there's this kind of crazy story about Billy Graham, who was the very famous evangelist.
Right.
He actually anonymously paid MLK's bail one time.
Really?
Yeah, which
that's surprising.
Kind of a weird, right?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily expect those two figures to be aligned. It's a great example of how support can come from unexpected places.
Totally.
Sometimes the people you least expect to have your back are the ones who step up in the most meaningful ways.
Yeah, for sure. And it also, I think, highlights the complexities of allyship, and how individuals from totally different backgrounds can find common ground in the fight for justice.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point, especially today when there's so much division and polarization. It's a reminder that we don't have to agree on everything to work together for a common cause.
Right, exactly.
And sometimes finding common ground with people who are different from us can be the most powerful way to make progress.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about some of his background and some of the personal challenges that he faced.
Right.
But now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the lesser-known influences on his thinking.
Okay, sounds good.
So while most people are familiar with his iconic speeches and marches, they might not know about his deep admiration for Gandhi and Thoreau.
Interesting.
Their philosophies of nonviolent resistance had a profound impact on his approach to activism.
Right. So it wasn't just about protesting for him. It was about finding a way to challenge injustice in a way that was both effective and ethical.
Yeah, totally. It was about upholding human dignity and appealing to people's consciences.
Right.
And really changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, I like that. It wasn't just about winning a battle.
Right.
It was about winning over people.
Exactly.
And creating lasting change.
Totally.
That's powerful.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see how those philosophical underpinnings really shaped his strategy.
Absolutely. And I think it's a strategy that's still relevant today.
Yeah, for sure.
When we think about the challenges we're facing in the world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and hopeless.
Right.
But MLK's example reminds us that even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
Totally. Well, and then there's his stance against the Vietnam War, which was incredibly controversial at the time.
Oh, right. I mean, that was a really divisive issue.
Yeah, for sure.
And it took a lot of courage for him to speak out against it, knowing that he could alienate some of his supporters.
Totally.
But it shows that his commitment to peace extended far beyond just racial issues.
Right, yeah. He saw the war as a symptom of a larger problem.
Yeah.
The willingness to use violence and oppression to achieve political goals.
Yeah, he was really ahead of his time in that sense.
Yeah.
He was recognizing the interconnectedness of different forms of injustice.
Right.
And he was calling for a more holistic approach to peace and justice.
Totally. And his opposition to the war really put him at odds with many, including some within the civil rights movement itself.
Right. It wasn't a popular stance to take.
Yeah, not at all.
But he stood by his principles, even when it was difficult.
Yeah, totally. And it's crazy to think about, too, that it wasn't just public opinion that he had to contend with.
Right.
But he was also under constant surveillance by the FBI.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at the time, was deeply suspicious of MLK and saw him as a threat.
That's wild.
Yeah, so they wiretapped his phones and bugged his hotel rooms and tried to discredit him any way they could.
Man, it's a dark reminder of how those in power often try to silence dissent and undermine anyone who challenges the status quo.
Right, totally. And, despite all of this, he continued his work even in the face of constant danger and scrutiny.
Right.
His final fight supporting Black sanitation workers in Memphis, is a testament to his dedication.
Absolutely. He never stopped fighting for justice and equality, no matter the cost.
Right.
And that campaign and his powerful "I've been to the mountaintop" speech really reveal his unwavering commitment to economic justice.
Yeah, for sure.
He understood that racial and economic inequality were intertwined and that true justice required addressing both.
Right. And that speech is particularly poignant, especially knowing that he was assassinated the very next day.
Right. It's almost as if he had a premonition of his own death.
Yeah.
His words, filled with such a sense of urgency and purpose, they really serve as a powerful reminder of the unfinished work he left behind.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, his assassination at just 39 years old.
Yeah, it's a tragic.
Such a tragic loss.
Absolutely. It's hard to fathom what he might have accomplished had he lived a longer life.
Right.
But even in his short time, he achieved so much. He traveled millions of miles, delivered countless speeches, wrote extensively, and inspired millions of people to join the fight for equality.
Right.
He received the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35.
Wow.
Which is just incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So his impact was truly global.
Right.
And his legacy continues to inspire activists and reformers around the world today.
Yeah, for sure. And his legacy is just undeniable. There are streets and schools and memorials named in his honor, and his birthday is celebrated as a national holiday.
Yeah.
But his impact goes far beyond these symbols.
Absolutely.
His words and actions continue to inspire people to fight for justice and equality.
Yeah, I think that's what's so remarkable about him.
Yeah.
Is that his message still resonates so strongly today, decades after his death.
Totally. And, it's amazing to think about all the progress that's been made during and after his fight.
Right.
I mean, he really accomplished more for racial equality in 13 years than had been achieved in the previous 300 years.
Yeah, that's a powerful testament to the impact he had.
It's incredible.
It really is. It shows what's possible when people come together and demand change.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it makes you wonder what else he might have achieved
Yeah,
if his life hadn't been cut short.
absolutely. It's a loss we still feel today.
Right. But his vision and his message continue to resonate,
Yeah, for sure.
even decades after his death.
Absolutely. His words and actions challenge us to confront injustice
Right.
and to strive for a more just and compassionate world. He reminded us that we all have a role to play in creating a better future.
And this deep dive has just been so eye-opening for me. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of MLK beyond the simplified hero narrative that we often hear.
Yeah, me too. It's been really fascinating to explore the complexities of his life and legacy.
Yeah, totally.
He was a brilliant orator, a courageous leader, and, a deeply flawed human being, too.
Right.
But ultimately, he was a powerful symbol of hope
Right.
and a catalyst for lasting change.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about how he would approach the challenges of today's world,
Yeah.
What would he say about the issues we face today?
Yeah.
How would he inspire us to action?
Those are great questions to ponder.
Yeah.
I encourage you to explore his work further,
Yeah.
read his speeches, read his writings,
Right.
and think about how his message of justice, equality, and nonviolence can guide us as we navigate the complexities of our own time.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Mhm.
I think we can all learn a lot from studying his life and legacy.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Sounds good. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
The level of danger and the level of commitment that he had to have to push forward
Yeah, totally.
is really inspiring.
So let's talk about some of his, a lot of people know the I Have a Dream speech, and they know about the marches,
yeah.
and they know a lot about his activism, but there's also some lesser-known influences that are kind of interesting to look at, right? So a lot of people don't know that he was really influenced by Gandhi and Thoreau.
Oh, interesting.
And they had these philosophies of nonviolent resistance.
Okay.
And so it's kind of cool to see how that shaped his approach to activism.
Right. So he wasn't just out there like protesting, any old way.
Right.
He really thought about how to challenge injustice in a way that was both, practical and also ethical.
Right. Yeah, it was about upholding human dignity and appealing to people's consciences. Not just like getting them angry and riled up.
Right. And it's really about changing hearts and minds.
Right, exactly.
It's one thing to win a battle, but it's another thing to win over people and to create lasting change.
Totally. Yeah. And there was this this thing where, he was really against the Vietnam War.
Right, that was a big deal.
And it was super controversial at the time.
Yeah, it was definitely a divisive issue back then.
And it took a lot of courage for him to speak out against it, knowing that it would alienate some of his supporters.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it shows that his commitment to peace, wasn't just about racial justice, right?
Right, yeah.
It extended to all forms of violence and oppression.
Yeah, he saw the war as like a symptom of this larger problem. Like the willingness to use violence and oppression to achieve political goals.
Right, he was really ahead of his time in that sense.
Yeah.
He was recognizing the interconnectedness of different forms of injustice.
Right.
And he was calling for a more holistic approach to peace and justice,
Totally.
which is something we're still struggling with today.
Yeah, for sure. And, so his opposition to the war actually put him at odds with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Even some people within the civil rights movement.
Right, it was definitely not a popular stance to take.
But he stood by his principles even when it was hard.
He did, which is so admirable.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about, too, that on top of all of that, he was under constant surveillance by the FBI.
Oh, wow, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at the time, was deeply suspicious of MLK and saw him as a threat.
Wow.
Yeah, so they were like wiretapping his phones and bugging his hotel rooms and just trying to discredit him any way they could.
Man, that's messed up.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, people in power will often try to silence dissent and undermine anyone who challenges the status quo.
Right, exactly. And it makes you wonder how many other activists and leaders have been targeted in similar ways.
Yeah, totally.
It's scary to think about.
But despite all of this, he continued his work, even in the face of constant danger and scrutiny.
Yeah.
His final fight supporting Black sanitation workers in Memphis is such a powerful example of his dedication.
Right. It shows that he was always willing to stand up for the most vulnerable members of society,
Yeah.
even when it put him at risk.
Right.
And that campaign and his powerful "I've been to the mountaintop" speech really reveal his deep commitment to economic justice, too.
Right.
He understood that racial and economic inequality were intertwined and that you can't really have one without the other.
Right. And that speech is especially poignant, knowing that he was assassinated the very next day.
Right. It's almost as if he had a premonition of his own death.
Yeah, it's chilling.
His words, filled with such a sense of urgency and purpose,
Yeah.
they really serve as this powerful reminder of the unfinished work he left behind.
Right.
It's like he knew his time was coming to an end, but he was determined to make the most of every moment.
And it's so sad, too, because he was just 39 years old when he was assassinated.
Way too young.
It's just tragic,
Yeah, it's hard to fathom what he might have accomplished if he had lived a longer life.
Right.
But even in his short time, he achieved so much.
Oh.
He traveled millions of miles, delivered countless speeches, wrote extensively, and inspired millions of people to join the fight for equality.
Yeah.
He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35.
Wow.
I mean, his impact was global,
Right.
and his legacy continues to inspire activists and reformers around the world today.
Yeah, and his legacy is just undeniable.
It really is.
There are streets and schools and memorials named in his honor.
Right.
His birthday is celebrated as a national holiday.
Yeah.
But his impact goes far beyond these symbols,
Yeah.
His words and actions continue to inspire people all over the world to fight for justice and equality.
Absolutely. I think that's what's so remarkable about him.
Yeah.
Is that his message still resonates so strongly today, decades after his death.
Right, exactly. And it's amazing to think about all the progress that's been made during and after his fight.
Right.
I mean, he accomplished more for racial equality in 13 years than had been achieved in the previous 3 centuries.
Yeah, that's truly remarkable.
It's crazy.
It really shows the power of one person to make a difference.
Right.
And the power of collective action to create lasting change.
Totally.
It's easy to get discouraged when we look at the state of the world today.
Yeah.
But MLK's example reminds us that change is possible,
Right.
even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Yeah, for sure. And, it really makes you wonder
Yeah.
what else he might have accomplished
Right.
if his life hadn't been cut so short.
Yeah. It's a loss that we still feel today.
Right. But his vision and his message continue to resonate even all these years later.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the power of his words and his actions.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, even though he's gone, his legacy lives on and continues to inspire us.
Totally. And it makes you think about, How would he approach the challenges of today's world?
Right.
What would he say about the issues that we face today?
Yeah, those are really good questions.
Yeah, and how would he inspire us to action?
I think that's something we all need to reflect on.
Yeah.
You know, what can we learn from his example?
Yeah.
And how can we apply his teachings to the challenges we face in our own lives?
Right.
So I encourage everyone to take some time to explore his work further.
Yeah.
You know, read his speeches, read his writings,
Yeah.
and really think about how his message of justice, equality, and nonviolence can guide us as we navigate the complexities of our own time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think we can all learn a lot from studying his life and legacy.
Absolutely. His words and actions, you know, they challenge all of us
Yeah.
to confront injustice wherever we see it
Right.
and to really strive for a more just and compassionate world.
Right.
He reminds us that we all have a role to play
Uh-huh.
in creating a better future.
Yeah. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a so much deeper understanding of MLK,
Yeah.
you know, beyond the simplified hero narrative that you often hear.
Yeah, right.
Like, he was so much more than just that, right?
Absolutely. He was complex.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that, right?
Right.
To acknowledge the complexities of his life and his legacy. He was a brilliant orator, a courageous leader,
Yeah.
and yeah, he was also a deeply flawed human being.
Right.
But ultimately, he was a powerful symbol of hope
Yeah.
and a catalyst for lasting change.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, like, how he would approach the challenges of today's world, you know?
Right.
Like, what would he say about the issues that we face today?
Yeah.
How would he inspire us to action?
Those are great questions to think about,
Yeah.
you know, and I encourage you to explore his work further.
Yeah.
Read his speeches, read his writings, and think about how his message of justice, equality, and nonviolence
Mm-hmm.
can guide us as we navigate the complexities of our own time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like,
Yeah.
I think we could all really benefit from studying his life and his legacy more deeply.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.